Hi, welcome to the bathtub, where when you hear this sound effect, and we stop it really quick because we don't want to be sued. You know, it's a new theme show here at the. It's this is low pixel, low tech, but we still had a theme song, and that is it's going to be called Short Story Roundabout, or Round and Round. I haven't really figured it out. Short Story Roundabout, and anyway, that's the theme of the show. I'll talk about it in a second. Anyway, we're still kind of coming down from the heady excitement of our International Bathing Alliance all coming together on that great 3,000th subscriber episode. Thanks to everybody who showed up, and it was very very fun for me to talk to some of you and all of you. We didn't have a bad person in the whole group. How did that happen? None of the nuts showed up. All the good people showed up, and except for me and Dodo, the only nuts that showed up. But everybody else was great. We just acted like book nerds, and we just said, "Did you read this? Did you read?" You know, when people get together who like books, all they do is name titles and authors. They don't really talk about anything else. They say, "Have you read so and so? Have you read so and so?" And that's all we did. So, thanks so much, and we're gonna have a. This is a because that all that international excitement was just we're still coming down from it. This is a post tech. This is low carb. No carbs were harmed in the production of this video. No carbs were harmed. We didn't touch a carb. This is a carbless drink. No alcohol. Nothing fun's going on here. And the idea of this is that when I try to tie these aimless talks around a single book or an author or some sort of idea. And basically, I don't read that way. I just basically read in a mishmash. And where I read the most mishmashy, it's the actual word, is with short stories. So, for example, if I read, I often will read a story collection all the way through, but usually I'll read two or three short stories by, say, Robert Sheckley or Richard Yates or any of the great short story writers. Robert Aikman, we've talked about. And I might read a couple of their stories, and then I kind of want to change a little bit because three short stories or two by a really good story writer, that's a lot. It kind of hits you with a lot, and it hits you that author's sensibility. And I always kind of like a little palate cleanser, so I like to move around a bit. So particularly in the past few weeks, I've been reading. I have about 4 or 5 short story collections on my little shelf over there, and I've been reading a few stories a day by different writers. And the 3 primary ones I thought I'd show you today. I'll start. So that's the whole point. Roundabout. I haven't finished any of these collections yet. I'm almost done with most of them. This is a new writer to me. We talked a bit about him, Michael Shea. And that's actually quite a good cover. That's from our friends. Oh no, this is from somebody else. Dark Regions Press. I wanted to say it's Hippocampus, but it's another group. And it's a few years old. I want to say this is. When did this come out originally? Not too long ago. 2018. It's our St. Joshi. He's ubiquitous, and he edited this and he wrote a nice little introduction to it. But anyway, Michael Shea is a writer. He's from San Francisco, and I'm always interested in Northern California writers. He died just a few years ago. And one of our bathing buddies was exchanging some notes with me somewhere, and he mentioned Michael Shea, and I didn't know anything about him. I confused him with somebody else, and I'd never read anything by him. And then I started kind of nosing around a bit and heard nothing but amazing things about the guy, really positive. People really liked him. And he's written a lot of different things. I have a bunch on the shelf, but he was known in the horror field. He wrote a series of kind of fantasy adventures or dark fantasies called Nift the Lean, which is he seems to be most loved for, and then a lot of horror stories. Anyway, he's written many books and various kind of different. They all have different tones and techniques to them. I think they're quite a range of work, but this is a book of basically his Lovecraft stories. It's called DEMIURGE. It comes over the complete Cthulhu. Cthulhu. I can't remember. Joshi told me how to pronounce Cthulhu. I think it's Cthulhu or something. The monsters. One of the monsters from Lovecraft. And all of the stories in this are based around characters or monsters from Lovecraft, but they've been translated to San Francisco Mission District, where Michael Shea, I guess, lived and worked at a really seedy motel. I mean, the kind you see in old 60s and 70s crime movies like Bullet or Dirty Harry, there's like prostitutes and drug dealers and all that stuff running around. And the big chain, the big web mesh wire stuff across the cashier's desk. And he worked in one of those for years. And all these characters are living in these really, really poor kind of criminal areas. And they're all odd characters. And yet there's this kind of Lovecraftian universe that's kind of bubbling up from the San Francisco streets and bay and all that stuff. It's a really well-written book. This guy really writes beautiful prose. I mean, I should have picked a passage, but I couldn't even find one because every single paragraph, he's such a good narrative writer. I mean, he is somebody I would give to writers to show them just the basic techniques of really good narrative prose and really visual. There's one image I keep getting in my head, which is he describes him walking across a lawn. He says, the grass was starred with dead leaves. And just the idea that those leaves are like, you could see the stars of them on the ground. And then when he describes these kind of monsters coming up from the deep, I can't even pronounce them because that's the problem with Lovecraft. There's who's the one that's covered with like with things? Oh, Sathagwa. I think that's the one that was invented by Clark Ashton Smith. And Dagon is one of them. But anyway, they're kind of all these kind of monsters are in the periphery of the stories. There's one where this guy's working for a construction guy and they're digging a swimming pool for some people in Marin, I think. He writes really well about the Bay Area. Really an interesting California writer. So anyway, they're kind of dense, not dense, that's not fair. They're very, very visual, kind of clear, beautifully written stories about completely fantastic events. Stylistically, they're very different from Lovecraft. But I would really recommend him. And I'm enjoying these. I'm almost finished with them. And they're really so different from anything else you could possibly read that they're perfect for me. Second of all is Isaac Bashevis Singer. One of our bathing buddies, I can't say his name, Youngstein or whatever, he has a certain name he calls him on his. I only know you guys from your emails names. He was talking about how much he loves him. And I have read Singer off and on over the decades. And about 8 or 10 years ago, I read this from cover to cover, A Friend of Kafka. And when I read short story collections, I completely forget. I forget every story in it. I do remember loving this book. And it was one of the only times that I ever remember, every time I was reading a story, I would finish it. And I would tell my wife about it. I want to tell her the story. That very rarely happens to me. I hate when people say, this is the story, what I just read, and tells me the story. I kind of wanted to tell her. They were so original and so interesting and so really narrative, and the characters were so interesting. And this was a lot more realistic, a little more realistic modernist type prose and stories. He wrote in Yiddish. He writes about Jewish families in New York, where he eventually emigrated, but also in Poland and Russia, often from incredibly dirt poor villages and cities. I really enjoyed this one, and I haven't read any other novels of his. I only read stories when they were in the New Yorkers. And I picked this up a while ago, and I started reading this, the Seance. I'm about 2/3 through it. And I read about 2 of these, and I can't really read more. They're really rich, beautiful, emotional, upsetting stories. Very funny. There's not even the most upsetting stories are incredibly funny. I mean, for example, he talks about these people who've gone through just horrific lives. And he describes one woman, which is the one, Yonda. He's often going off into kind of fantastic fantasy stories. They often go off into, there's ghosts and jinn and people coming in. There's one story where a young girl is inhabited by different ghosts, and they're arguing with each other. But then he'll do very more realistic stories, such as one about a girl named Yonda who works at some hotel in this just dirt poor village. And she works he describes it, just excruciating labor. of some of these people, and the kindnesses between them, but also the real viciousness of some of the people. And the two people she works for die, and she has to find her way home. She has no money. It's just heartbreaking and yet beautiful. Just a beautiful story. There's one where a guy who's like a Yiddish teacher, he's a writer like Isaac Bashevis singer, and he goes somewhere to talk to give a talk on Yiddish writing. And as he's staying there, the old woman who invited him is dead. She dies during the night. And he has to go in and sit with her while the granddaughter goes off to get the doctor. And the end of the story is just him sitting in this room with death, just starting to freak out. And in the ending, it always pays off. He always has a great payoff to a story. Something comes on at the end which really, really moves you. Very Chekhov. He's very often compared to Chekhov. He's far more kind of adventurous in his storytelling. I don't mean he's better in that way, but he often tells much more fantastic stories and goes off into much more unrealistic territory than Chekhov did. But he's very similar, and his compassion for some of the people who are so horrible is exceptional. There's another one I just finished. I loved it. Henna Fire. I'll just tell you a little bit about that. Again, it's hard to talk about Singer without just simply wanting to say this and this happened and that happened and this. Henna Fire is about this woman, old Jewish woman, who's just really mean. When someone goes into a room, she insults them about their physical, what they look and who they are, and her parents, and she knows everything awful about everybody who she meets. Their family, she might mention your great grandmother was a whore, or your great grandfather murdered the butcher, and she's just this nasty woman. And eventually, for some reason I can't remember, she can't talk as much, and she stops shouting at people, but she starts fires. Wherever she goes, things start to go up in flames. That's not like Stephen King sort of thing, but fires are erupting all around her. It's an extraordinary story, and especially when you meet these characters who are sometimes so awful, and you end up the story just feeling this incredible compassion and interest in them. So I'm a big Isaac Bashevis Singer fan, and growing more so every day. And I have boxes. I have a shelf of his stuff in there I want to get back to. So he's somebody you might really look into if you like short stories. This has got more fantasy, ghosty stories in it, whereas this one, as I recall, has fewer, but they're both great. They both have different textures to them, I think. Finally, to really cleanse my palate, I picked up the latest Karl Barks, the complete Karl Barks from the wonderful people at Fantagraphics. This is called Balloonatics, and these are they're perfectly formed short stories. Karl Barks has a visual eye and a perfect sense for narrative clarity. So he always has a nice beginning. It always closes the story somewhere. It surprises you a bit, and I've really enjoyed this one. This is late. This is some of his later Donald Duck. So it's not the world hopping. The Uncle Scrooge are my favorites. We've talked about him. But they're just the Donald Ducks. And those mainly are shorter, like 8 to 10 pages. And they're usually with Huey, Dewey, and Louie. They're always with Huey, Dewey, and Louie. And it's mainly about Donald trying to make money and never making any money. That's basic. He's a failure at everything he does. He has no connection to the cartoons, those boring cartoons where he's squawking and jumping up and down. He's a much more interesting character, the Karl Barks. And I read a couple of these. I've been reading 1 or 2 of these a day ever since I got it last week. And it fits right in well with Michael Shea and Isaac Bashevis Singer, two very, very different writers. All three wonderful short story writers. And again, we'll do some more of these because there's so many writers I want to get back to, and so many short story writers I want to read and reread. And this is a way of doing it. Okay, so Roundabout, short story Roundabout. See you all soon. Get ready. I'm not going to start announcing it, until 2040 or something. But 5,000 subscribers. We're heading that direction. It'll probably take us 15, 20 years probably. Okay. Happy bathing.